Autumn in Boston is brief. On the weekend when the fall foliage was at its most beautiful, Melissa Johnson gazed out the library window. She found peace in this quiet space surrounded by books. It had been her personal refuge since childhood. "Melissa, could you take a look at the layout plan for the new children's section?" her colleague Martha called out. Melissa smiled and paused her work. This was her 7th year working as a librarian at the local Carlisle Public Library. She loved this job from the bottom of her heart. "Of course. I'll be right there." For Melissa, who grew up in the affluent Boston suburb of Bryn Ridge, working at the library was considered disappointing by her family. Her mother Evelyn, in particular, could never understand her daughter's career choice. Evelyn owned the most successful real estate company in the area. She excelled at high-end property transactions, and her negotiation skills and connections made her a respected figure in the local economy. "You're a Johnson. You shouldn't waste your life on such a modest job," was Evelyn's catchphrase whenever discussing her daughter's career. Melissa's father, Richard Johnson, was a renowned lawyer in Boston. His law firm had established an unshakable position in corporate law. Though not as blunt as her mother, he also failed to understand his daughter's choice. "Melissa, you have a brilliant mind. Why not put it to use after graduating from a top-tier university like Harvard?" he would invariably say at their Sunday family dinners. Melissa would simply nod silently. She knew explanations would fall on deaf ears. In contrast, her younger sister Vanessa was living the life her parents had envisioned. She managed Elysee, the most upscale boutique in Boston, spending her glamorous days catering to upper-class clientele. She was married to James Clark, the CEO of a mid-sized but rapidly growing technology company. "Hey, sis, you're coming to the party, right? James' investors will be there. I might even introduce you to some wonderful single men," Vanessa had said at last week's dinner. Melissa recalled her sister's surprised expression when she mentioned she was already seeing someone. "Really? Who? What's he like? What does he do for a living?" The order of these questions made Melissa inwardly sigh. For Vanessa, and for her parents, a person's worth was always closely tied to social status. "His name is Tom Williams. He's a plumber." Silence enveloped the family. Her father removed his glasses and began wiping them with his handkerchief, while her mother's expression instantly froze. Vanessa couldn't suppress her laughter. "A plumber? You're joking, right?" Melissa remembered how she had met Tom. 2 years ago, when there was a water leak in the library basement, he had come to fix it. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had a quiet but definite presence. During the repair, he enthusiastically discussed books with her. He particularly enjoyed historical novels. He said he made it a habit to visit the library between jobs. "Have you read Stephen Pressfield?" he had asked, surprising Melissa. He was one of her favorite historical writers too. From there, they gradually grew closer. Tom's sincere character, his kindness that couldn't ignore people in need, and above all, his intelligence and humility, Melissa was drawn to everything about him. "You deserve better," her mother's words lingered in her ears. She had heard this phrase many times. But Melissa loved Tom's character. She loved that he took pride in his work, that clients trusted him deeply, and most of all, that he genuinely supported her job and dreams. "Tom proposed to me." When she told her parents and sister last night, their reactions were as expected. Her mother cried, her father silently left the room. Vanessa repeatedly asked, "Are you really going to marry someone like him?" Wedding preparations were a series of difficulties. Her parents were reluctant to provide financial support, so Melissa and Tom dipped into their savings to plan a modest ceremony. Still, Melissa had no regrets. Tom's love was genuine, and she believed in it with all her heart. After finishing her work at the library, Melissa headed to her apartment. Tomorrow was her wedding day with Tom. Her stomach felt knotted with nerves. Her parents had eventually agreed to attend, though their blessing was far from heartfelt. Vanessa and James were also planning to come, but it was clear they too thought the marriage was a waste. In front of her apartment, Tom was waiting after his workday. His tired face broke into a gentle smile. "How was it? The final meeting?" Melissa took a deep breath. "Well, it's finally over. Though Mother kept saying, it's still not too late, right up to the end." Tom embraced her. "Tomorrow, I'll prove to your family that our love is real." Melissa buried her face in his chest. She couldn't imagine how tomorrow would unfold. But one thing was certain, she loved Tom. And that was all that truly mattered. The spire of St. Mary's Church stretched toward the blue Boston sky. Inside, the church was filled with early autumn light. Before the altar, decorated with white roses and lilacs, Melissa and Tom exchanged vows of love. Her white dress wasn't as luxurious as her mother's had been, but its simple, elegant design enhanced her soft beauty. "I vow to love you for the rest of my life." Tom's voice was quiet but strong. Melissa smiled with tears in her eyes. The beaming smile of his mother Martha in the front row was striking. In contrast, Melissa's family wore complex expressions. Evelyn maintained a social smile, but her eyes were cold. Richard's expression remained stern, while Vanessa and James looked bored. Nevertheless, the ceremony proceeded smoothly, and eventually all the guests moved to the small hall they had rented. The tables were decorated with seasonal flowers, creating a simple yet warm atmosphere. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a toast." The hall fell silent at the MC's voice. Traditionally, the bride's father would give the first speech, but Richard had declined this role. Instead, Evelyn slowly stood up and took her champagne glass. Melissa felt inwardly tense. She couldn't predict what her mother might say. "Everyone, thank you for joining us on my daughter's special day." Evelyn's voice had the pleasant resonance cultivated through real estate dealings. However, Melissa detected the underlying tension in it. "Melissa, you're a wonderful daughter. Always stubborn, never doing anything but what you want." Light laughter spread through the venue. Evelyn continued. "To be honest, I never thought this day would come." More laughter filled the room. Tom gently squeezed Melissa's hand. "Because she's..." Evelyn paused for a moment and gave a meaningful smile. "Marrying a poor plumber, please, everyone, don't laugh." Evelyn deliberately put her hand to her mouth, adding, "Just kidding." The venue erupted in laughter. Melissa felt her face grow hot. Tom displayed an uncomfortable expression but maintained a polite smile. But joking aside, Evelyn continued. "We parents want our children's happiness. If Melissa is happy, that's fine." Her words concealed the question, "But are you really happy?" When Evelyn finished her speech, Vanessa stood up next. Dressed in a designer gown, she looked around the hall with a dazzling smile. "Congratulations, sis. What a typical choice for you." Vanessa put sarcastic emphasis on the word typical. "But what a difference from my CEO husband. James' company is growing again this year. Nothing like Tom's job." She looked at her husband as she spoke. James proudly stood up and added his own words. "That's right, no plumber can compete with a company like ours. Melissa, come visit us anytime. I'll show you what real success looks like." The guests were still laughing, but an uncomfortable atmosphere began to fill the air. Tom's face was rigid, and Melissa was trembling with embarrassment and anger. Seeing tears in her eyes, Tom squeezed her hand even tighter. At that moment, there was a quiet movement. Tom's mother, Martha Williams, slowly stood up. A petite woman in her 60s, but her bearing carried dignity. She asked the MC for the microphone. "Excuse me. Just a few words as the mother of the groom." Martha's voice was gentle, but there was a sharp light in her eyes. The hall fell silent. "Thank you all for blessing my son's marriage. However, there seems to be a misunderstanding that I'd like to address." Evelyn and Richard exchanged anxious glances. Vanessa frowned. "My son Tom indeed works as a plumber. But do you know why he does that?" Martha's words changed the atmosphere of the venue completely. Melissa looked at Tom with a confused expression. Tom smiled slightly and nodded to let his mother continue. "I don't intend to reveal that here today." Martha smiled gently. Her smile had a mysterious quality, as if hiding some unknown truth. "I'm just deeply grateful that Melissa loves my son. She loved him for his character, not his social status or wealth. Our family is blessed to welcome such a wonderful daughter-in-law." Martha's words carried weight. The hall remained silent. Evelyn, Richard, Vanessa, and James wore uncomfortable expressions. "Now, let's toast to the happiness of the bride and groom." Martha raised her glass high. A delayed chorus of cheers rose from the guests. Melissa whispered to Tom. "What did your mother mean?" Tom smiled gently. "Don't worry. It's all good. I'll explain everything later." Confusion colored the faces of Evelyn and Richard. Vanessa was hurriedly saying something to her husband. Whatever Martha's words had implied, it had planted seeds of anxiety in their hearts. The blue ocean of Hawaii stretched beyond the window. Melissa stood on the hotel balcony, taking a deep breath. The view of Waikiki Beach was breathtaking, but her mind was still captive to what had happened at the wedding. "I brought you some coffee." Tom came out onto the balcony and offered her a warm mug. Melissa accepted it with a grateful smile. "Tom, won't you tell me the truth? Why your mother said those things?" It was the third day of their honeymoon, but Melissa still couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious incident at the wedding. Martha's words had completely silenced her family. For the remainder of the ceremony, her parents and Vanessa had been unusually quiet. Tom answered slowly, gazing at the sea. "I promise I'll tell you everything. But let's purely enjoy this vacation. When we get back, my parents have invited us to dinner. Everything will be revealed then." Melissa looked dissatisfied but didn't pursue it further. She trusted Tom. And she knew he was a man who kept his promises. The week in Hawaii passed quickly. Melissa truly enjoyed her time with Tom, but questions lingered in the back of her mind. On the plane back to Boston, she occasionally glanced at Tom's face. He appeared calm, but she sensed something significant was about to happen. "My parents are waiting for us tomorrow evening." Tom said this before the plane landed. Melissa simply nodded. The next evening, Tom drove her to Newton, a suburb of Boston. As they entered an upscale residential area and proceeded down streets lined with large houses, Melissa's tension mounted. "Here we are." Tom stopped the car in front of an elegant white mansion. Melissa gasped. The enormous two-story house was surrounded by beautiful gardens. "This is your family home." Melissa couldn't believe her eyes. Tom just smiled, got out of the car, and opened her door. As they approached the entrance, the door opened, and Martha greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome home, you two. How was your trip?" Martha gently embraced Melissa. Her warmth helped ease Melissa's tension a little. The interior was filled with tasteful furniture, and large windows facing the street revealed a well-maintained garden. "Tom, show her to the living room. Your father will be back soon." Tom led Melissa into a spacious living room. Artwork adorned the walls, and family photos were arranged above the fireplace. Melissa was drawn to one photo, a young Tom in a suit, smiling with his parents at what appeared to be a college graduation ceremony. "Is this Harvard?" Melissa asked incredulously. Tom quietly nodded. "I earned an MBA there." His words spread confusion in Melissa's mind. An ordinary plumber with a Harvard MBA. That seemed impossible. The door opened, and Tom's father Joseph entered. A dignified man of about 65, his warm smile contrasted with his sharp gaze. "Hello, you two. How was the honeymoon?" Dinner was lavish, but Melissa barely tasted the food. Joseph poured wine while proudly discussing his son's work. "Tom has completed his 2 years in the field and it's time for him to move to the next step." Melissa looked at Tom with a confused expression. He smiled calmly. "Melissa, it's time for the truth. I do work as a plumber. But it's temporary." Joseph continued. "In our company, future executives must gain field experience. That's our family tradition." "Company?" Melissa asked in a puzzled voice. "Yes," Martha answered gently. "Williams Infrastructure. One of the largest plumbing and infrastructure companies on the East Coast." In Melissa's mind, puzzle pieces gradually fell into place. Tom's pride in his work, his intelligence, and above all, his family's elegance, everything started to make sense. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked Tom. Surprise and confusion, rather than anger, showed in her voice. Tom took her hand. "I wanted you to see the real me. Not my title or family background." A few weeks later, a family dinner was arranged, including Melissa's parents and her sister and brother-in-law. Since Melissa's apartment was too small, they reserved a high-end restaurant in the city. However, when Tom offered to pay, Melissa's mother Evelyn made a displeased face. "It's fine, we'll pay. It must be difficult with your salary." Throughout dinner, Evelyn continued to make sarcastic remarks about Tom's job. Richard was polite but showed no genuine respect. Vanessa and James were busy boasting about James' company's success. "Our company is building a new headquarters," Vanessa bragged proudly. 5 stories, all glass facades, a luxurious office. James added smugly, "Tech innovations is getting noticed in the industry." Last year's sales increased by 30% compared to the previous year. Tom listened quietly. Suddenly, his phone rang. Looking at the screen, he said, "Excuse me, it's an urgent work call," and left the table. Melissa watched her husband walk away, wondering what he was planning. A few minutes later, Tom returned. His expression showed determination. "Everyone, I have a request," he said quietly but firmly. "I'd like to invite you all to my workplace tomorrow." Evelyn and Richard exchanged glances. "Oh, a plumbing site?" Evelyn said sarcastically. "Well, yes, something like that," Tom smiled. "I'll pick you up at your hotel at 10 a.m. Vanessa and James looked bored, but Melissa's parents reluctantly agreed. Melissa herself had never seen her husband's workplace. Her chest was full of curiosity and anxiety. That night, back at their apartment, Melissa asked Tom, "What's really going to happen tomorrow?" Tom gently kissed her cheek. "It's time to show your family the real me. Don't worry." Melissa recalled Tom's gentle smile and renewed her vow to trust him. Morning light reflected brightly off Boston's skyscrapers. Melissa looked out the window and took a quiet, deep breath. She had an intuition that today, something would change. "Ready?" Tom placed his hand on her shoulder. He was unusually dressed in a suit. The simple navy blue suit with a white shirt and red tie completely transformed his demeanor. Unlike his usual work clothes, he radiated confidence and dignity. "Yes, but I'm nervous," Melissa answered honestly. "I don't know what my parents might say." Tom smiled gently. "It'll be okay. Everything will change today. When they arrived at the hotel, Evelyn, Richard, Vanessa, and James were already waiting in the lobby. Upon seeing her daughter, Evelyn immediately displayed a dissatisfied expression. "Oh, Melissa. You should have worn something more proper." Melissa looked down at her simple dress. Since she hadn't been told they were going somewhere special, she had come in casual attire. Tom took her hand and whispered, "You look perfect." Everyone got into Tom's car. In the back seat, James whispered something in Vanessa's ear, and they both suppressed laughter. Richard silently stared out the window, and Evelyn was checking her smartphone. It was clear that none of them were genuinely interested in touring Tom's workplace. The car headed toward the downtown business district. Among the high-rise buildings, Tom slowed down. "We're here." He parked in front of a massive high-rise building covered in glass and steel. Williams Infrastructure was prominently displayed on the front of the building. "Isn't there some mistake?" Evelyn asked in a confused voice. "Your worksite is here." Tom calmly replied, "Yes, I'm working here today." The group headed toward the building's entrance. As they entered the luxurious lobby, the security guard at the gate saluted Tom as soon as he saw him. "Good morning, Mr. Williams." All the reception staff stood up as well, showing respect to Tom. "Welcome back, Mr. Williams. The board meeting preparations are complete." Melissa looked at Tom in wonder. He simply smiled and led the group to the VIP elevator. "This building is amazing," Vanessa exclaimed in admiration. "But what are you doing here?" "You'll find out soon," Tom answered briefly. The elevator stopped at the top floor. When the doors opened, a spacious executive floor appeared. Conference rooms and private offices lined both sides of the corridor, with staff busily working. When they saw Tom, everyone bowed respectfully. Tom led the group to the far end of the corridor. There was a large office with a door plate that read, "Thomas Williams, Jr., CEO Designate." Melissa was dumbfounded. Evelyn and Richard were speechless, the color drained from Vanessa's face, and James turned pale, clearing his throat repeatedly. Tom opened the door and invited the group into the spacious office. Large windows offered a panoramic view of Boston, and various awards and certificates adorned the walls. "Please, have a seat," Tom gestured to the conference table. Once everyone was seated, he began speaking quietly. "Melissa, everyone. The truth is, I'm the heir to Williams Infrastructure, one of North America's largest plumbing and infrastructure companies." Evelyn gasped. "But you're a plumber." "Yes, that's right," Tom nodded. "Before taking over the company from my father, I worked as a plumber to gain field experience. To understand what all our employees do and what challenges they face." Richard leaned back in his chair, wearing an expression of disbelief. "I grew up in a privileged environment," Tom continued. "I earned an MBA from Harvard Business School and did internships in Europe. But my father always taught me, you can't lead people without knowing the field. So after college, I started working in the field using a different name." Melissa was too surprised to speak. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from anger, but from complex emotions. "I met Melissa at the library. She saw me for who I am, not my title or family background." Tom looked tenderly at Melissa. "I can't express in words how valuable that is to me." James asked in a trembling voice, "What's the annual revenue of Williams Infrastructure?" $2 billion, Tom answered matter-of-factly. "By the way, your company, Tech Innovations, is one of our clients. We just received the contract for the plumbing system in your new headquarters last month." James' face turned bright red, and he was at a loss for words. Vanessa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "But that's not all," Tom continued. "Melissa, the fact that you loved me thinking I was just a plumber is what matters most to me. Unlike your parents or sister, you have the ability to see a person's true essence. Melissa wiped away tears as she stood up, rushed to Tom, and embraced him. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to be sure your love was genuine, Tom answered quietly. In this world, too many people approach you for wealth and status. You were different. That was the most precious thing to me. Evelyn stood up from her chair, stammering. Tom, we misunderstood you. I sincerely apologize. Richard also stood up and extended his hand to Tom. Please take care of my daughter. We were wrong. Vanessa remained staring at the table, unable to move. James looked anxiously at Tom. James, Tom turned to him. I think your company has potential. If you ever need advice on management, I'm here to help. James wore a surprised expression and could only manage to say, thank you. Afterward, Tom gave the group a tour of the company. He showed them the massive design department, research and development lab, and the state-of-the-art management center. Evelyn and Richard quietly followed, observing James, who was eagerly asking questions about Tom's company. At lunchtime, Tom escorted everyone to the executive dining room on the top floor. His parents, Joseph and Martha, were waiting there. Welcome, Joseph greeted them warmly. We finally meet officially. Martha moved close to Melissa and whispered, when Tom first told me about you, his eyes were shining. He found true love. Melissa smiled. Her heart was full of complex emotions, but one thing was certain, she loved Tom. And that wasn't influenced by his title or wealth. Toward the end of lunch, Tom stood up and raised his glass. To new family bonds. Everyone clinked glasses. But in the eyes of Evelyn, Richard, Vanessa, and James, there was still embarrassment and regret. They had painfully realized how superficial their values had been. Melissa squeezed Tom's hand. Between them was true love. Emma, you'll fall if you run like that. Melissa called out to her 2-year-old daughter running around the backyard. The spring sunlight made her golden hair shine. At the garden table, Tom was reviewing documents while occasionally watching his daughter with a fond smile. A year had passed since then. Tom had officially become CEO of Williams Infrastructure, and Melissa had begun helping with the company's charitable activities. The Opening Futures Through Reading program she had established was highly regarded as an initiative providing educational opportunities for underprivileged children. Our guests will be here soon, Melissa said, looking at the clock. Tom nodded and began gathering his papers. The doorbell rang, and Maria the maid showed Evelyn and Richard in. They carried large gift boxes in their arms. Grandma. Grandpa. Emma ran over and clung to Evelyn's legs. Evelyn picked up her granddaughter and kissed her cheek. How are you doing? Our little princess. Richard shook hands with Tom and said, your recent shareholders' meeting showed excellent leadership. There was respect in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Melissa smiled quietly. The relationship with her parents was gradually being repaired. They had expressed shame and apologized for their prejudice and discriminatory attitudes. Building complete trust would take time, but at least they were making an effort. Meanwhile, Vanessa and James were going through a difficult period. Tech Innovations had fallen into a management crisis after a major investment failure, and James was trying to rebuild with Tom's help. It wasn't easy for him to swallow his pride and bow his head to Tom, but he had no other choice if he wanted to protect his company and employees. Vanessa had changed too. She had begun to reconsider her brand-oriented lifestyle and think about true value. She was slowly reconciling with Melissa and occasionally came to look after Emma. The bond between the sisters was being restored, slowly but surely. As someone with Williams blood, Emma will surely have a wonderful future, Evelyn said during lunch. Tom quietly shook his head. What matters is what she wants to become. We intend to respect her choices. Melissa squeezed her husband's hand. They shared the value that a person's worth cannot be measured by occupation, social status, or wealth. Emma would have the freedom to choose her own path. In the afternoon, Tom and Melissa chatted quietly in the garden shade. "Your mother's words changed everything that day," Melissa said, gazing into the distance. Tom smiled. "Mother has always been that way. She has an eye for spotting the essential. She's very happy that you've joined our family." "I'm happy too," Melissa gently kissed her husband's cheek. "Even that embarrassing incident at our wedding is a good memory now." They laughed together. Life is unpredictable. Their story had taught many people how dangerous and foolish superficial judgments can be. In the back of the garden, Emma laughed as she chased butterflies. Her future was filled with endless possibilities. And above all, she was growing up surrounded by love, watched over by parents who understood true value.